Well, the Morrison government need just one more crossbench vote in order to repeal the controversial Medevac laws, and that's the vote of Tasmanian Senator Jackie Lambie. Today, in yet another example of where this legislation has removed the government's ability to act in the best interests of Australians when it comes to assessing the character of those allowed entry into Australia, we're told an asylum seeker on Nauru who's been charged with domestic violence offences and, as I've already said, faces allegations he tried to groom a 13-year-old girl, has nonetheless circumvented any opposition from the Home Affairs Minister and been approved for medical transfer to Australia due to mental health treatment needs. As at tonight, this man is currently awaiting a flight to Australia. The Home Affairs Minister, Peter Dutton, discussed this issue when he joined me a little while ago from Canberra. Minister, concerning reports today that there is a man en route to Australia from Nauru charged with serious offences in relation to domestic violence and accusations that he tried to groom a 13-year-old girl. Now, reports are too that you're powerless to stop him under these Medevac laws. Isn't this precisely making a mockery of Australia's once tough border protection rules?
Well, Peter, the Labor Party were warned about this last year. It's almost 12 months ago since the Labor Party sided with the Greens and the left-leaning independents to push this bill through the Parliament. Now, we warned that people of bad character would come and that the Minister was compelled to accept that person into our country under what is now Australian law. We've tried to repeal the bill. We have passed the repealing of the Medevac laws through the lower house, and yet we're stuck in the Senate because Anthony Albanese says that the Medevac laws are working effectively. Effectively what? When you can get somebody here to our country with questionable medical needs and who is with this sort of allegation against him. It's completely unacceptable, and I think Mr Albanese needs to step up. But of course the left of the Labor Party continue to dominate the thinking around border protection policy, and it undermines our border protection policy, which Mr Albanese needs to deal with as well. So we've got a huge problem in the Medevac law, and I'm hoping that the Senate can consider this bill this week.
Well, just picking up that point about the Labor Party and the left of the Labor Party, we saw today tweets put out by Christina Keneally standing alongside the Greens with a petition calling for Save Our Medevac. That was the push. Is this a new move by Labor? They used to say under Bill Shorten there wasn't a cigarette paper between the Labor Party and the coalition on border protection issues, but is this a new Labor move?
Peter, I pointed out today that the Labor Party wasted billions of dollars when our borders were broken. They poured money into fixing the borders, a problem of their own making. Of course, they never did fix it. We have, during Tony Abbott's time, right up until today, been able to implement policies which have resulted in us defending our borders and taking control of our borders again. One point out of this Medevac law is that it undermines our border protection policies in this country, because people smugglers in other countries can just say, look, you can get to Australia through Nauru, through this medical law or the bill that Labor passed. So it undermines our border integrity and it allows us to bring people to our country that are of questionable character, and there's no ability to send them back home. So once they've received medical attention, under the Medevac law, you can't send them back. So in many cases, it's not just the cost of the medical transfer now, it's also the cost associated with, in some cases, people who will be on welfare in our country for decades to come. So the tail of the liability of the Medevac bill, even if we can get it abolished in the Senate, is going to cost an enormous amount of money. And if there is an Australian child or woman who falls victim to one of these individuals, then the Labor Party has a lot of explaining to do. And I think the left, as you say, are in control. Christina Keneally is even further to the left than Anthony Albanese. And I don't know whether she's just freelancing, but I think it is a very bad look for the Labor Party at the moment, and all Australians are hearing the message that Anthony Albanese is even weaker on border protection than Kevin Rudd or Julia Gillard.
How confident are you that you'll get Senator Lambie's support?
I don't want to speak for Senator Lambie. We've had constructive discussions with her. I hope that she can support the bill because it does come down to her vote, and she's not given a definite indication as she said even in the press today. So I obviously would be very grateful for her support, because I think it's in our national interest for these bad laws to be abolished. And Jackie Lambie, I hope, can support us, because we can't get the support of Anthony Albanese. We don't need to worry about independent support in the Senate if we can get the support from the Labor Party. And it's not too late for Mr Albanese to admit that they've made a mistake, to admit that this law allows people of questionable character to come into our country and then compels us to keep them here even after they've received medical attention. So I hope that Mr Albanese can fold at the 11th hour. I don't think that's going to be the case, and it will come down to Jackie Lambie, and I hope that she can support the bill, because it's in our country's interest for her to do so.
All right, well, let's drop any pretence that this was a loophole that somehow crept its way into the amendment, that this wasn't what this legislation was designed to do. In fact, I argued at the time, you did too, Minister, that this was by design a backdoor way through Operation Sovereign Borders. We know 179 individuals have come to Australia, over 55 once here, have refused tests or refused medical treatment. Only 2 out of the 179 remain in hospital. How many more, if this legislation isn't passed by the time you rise from Parliament at the end of next week? You're then away for, 10 weeks or so until Parliament resumes in February. What's the likelihood, if this legislation is not repealed in the next 10 days' time, that we'll see basically Nauru and Manus Island emptied out by stealth over the Christmas break?
Well, Peter, we've been able to send now about 642 people to the United States off Manus and Nauru. So I always say that I've never put a person onto Manus or Nauru, but my job is to clean up Labor's mess. We've got all of the children out of detention. We've closed detention centres. And don't forget, it's a really important point, that the boats had already started. People thought the Labor Party was going to be elected. So did the people smugglers. And they had already put people into boats on water. And so that was the first job I had when we were re-elected, to make sure that we could put this issue back in the box yet again. So I don't think people should forget the fact that if Mr Shorten had have been elected Prime Minister, we would have had hundreds of boat arrivals already. So you're right, the Labor Party used this as a backdoor way to bring people to our country, because that's what wins them votes in inner city seats. And people in outer metropolitan areas, in seats like mine, right across New South Wales, WA, they are completely and utterly forgotten about when it comes to the Labor Party. I believe that the vast majority of Australians support strong border protection policies, and the fact that Labor still in 2019 doesn't get it just says to me that they're completely at odds with the broader Australian public. So we need to make sure that we remind them of that, because there is a big difference still, probably more so than in any recent year, a bigger difference between the Labor Party on the far left and us with, I think, a sensible position, strong borders, and making sure that we don't have people drowning at sea, or kids back in detention, or people of bad character coming to our country. Because, as you point out, Labor had their eyes wide open. They knew the consequences. They were warned of the consequences of Medevac. And even to this very day, they still hold their ground, and they're happy to see people come here of questionable character, and in some cases, people that we have concern about, particularly those people that have allegations against them in relation to children, sexual offences otherwise. I don't want those people in our country. We were providing medical assistance to people before. All of that regime was in place. It's still in place. If people need medical attention, they receive it. But this backdoor way into Australia is just guaranteeing a life in our country for people that shouldn't be living here permanently. And it's completely taken away from the government of the day the opportunity to say no to people of bad character. And Mr Albanese is squarely responsible for that.
Well, Minister, with those statistics I just went through before, you've got over a quarter of people coming to Australia under medical evacuation circumstances and knocking back medical treatment once they're here. So clearly, in my mind, this is about access to the court system and a chance to relitigate their assessments in relation to refugee status. Of the 179, can you give me any indication of how many are seeking to stay via Australian courts?
Well, some of the people may well have an intention to go down that path. We haven't tested that yet. And as I say, under the legislation, people have the ability to stay. So we have to have a look at those individual cases, but it's clear that many of the cases who have come before have engaged lawyers essentially as they're walking off the plane. So this is a big problem. It's a costly problem, and it's one I think that Australians are rightly disgusted at.
And just before we go, there's been a lot of debate in the chamber today about your colleague, Angus Taylor. It appears the Prime Minister's behind him tonight. Is that the right position?
Of course it is. Look, this, as I understand it, investigation from the New South Wales Police was prompted by a letter of referral from all people, Mark Dreyfus. Mark Dreyfus has made a sport of referring people to the police. It's a stunt and it casts a cloud over people that don't deserve to have that cloud cast over them. So I think people should call out Mark Dreyfus for what it is, and it's a political stunt. And we know that they've been on the case of Angus for months because Anthony Albanese has some unhealthy obsession with Angus Taylor. It needs to stop, and Angus Taylor, I think, is doing a great job in his portfolio, which I suspect is the reason that Labor continue to throw up all of these spurious allegations against him.